Since you're about to listen to a podcast from Escape Collective, I'm going to take this quick opportunity to suggest that you consider becoming an Escape Collective member today. Whether you're into bike racing, bike tech, cycling adjacent tangents, or all of the above, becoming a member at escapecollective.com/member gets you full access to everything over on the website, escapecollective.com, and all of our members-only podcasts. You also get to join our very awesome community of fellow members. So head on over to escapecollective.com/member and sign up.
Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz, joining Ronan McLaughlin. How are you, Ronan?
I'm good, yeah. You got the Performance Process part right there. You've got a few podcasts today. I thought you were going to trip up and say the wrong name.
I do. I have a 3-podcast morning. You know, that's just this is Escape Radio at this point. We got something a bit different for you all today. Actually, not that different. Most of the show is going to be a really fascinating, in-depth chat with Stefan Küng, a Watt monster and an Arrow monster. I think
Arrowweenie, I think, was the term.
Arrowweenie.
Yes,
that's a bit derogatory, but you know that we'll go with it. We'll go with it anyway. So yeah, most of this podcast is going to be Ronan catching up with Stefan Küng. Really fascinating chat. You know, this is a guy who has sort of seen quite a bit of change, I think, in time trialing, in professional cycling, and the things that he has to pay attention to stay on top. And yeah, it's really great chat. But we thought it's only about half an hour. So we thought we would open the show today with just a bit of news, because this is coming to you middle of June. So we've just finished up the Dauphiné. The Tour de Suisse is on right now. The Tour de France is coming. The Olympics are coming, and all of that combines to mean that we've got a whole bunch of new time trial bikes floating around the internet. Some formally launched, some not yet. But we thought we'd just talk through them and what Ronan has seen, what you think is interesting, what some of the trends are, and then we'll jump into the conversation with Küng. So I guess, Ronan, first and foremost, give me the list. What have we got that's popped up in the last couple of weeks?
The list is seemingly growing all the time. This week alone, we've had a new Pinarello Bolide spotted under Filippo Ganna. Very much like the old one, but there are a couple of subtle updates to that. There is also the new Willier that we had a bit of a complete exclusive on the sort of behind-the-scenes look at the development of that bike, and I had tracked it over the past 4 months or so, and we published a bit of a deep dive into that process earlier this week. So both of those bikes, the Pinarello and the Willier, we've got articles on the website dedicated to those. Before that, there was the new Giant Trinity that appeared just before the Giro. Before that, with the Cervelo P5 this year at Algarve, I think it was, where Visma Lisa bike now. They're still saying Jumbo.
The name, with Unchained on right now, the name thing is really getting me, because we have to go back to calling it the old thing for Unchained. Anyway, keep going.
Well,
it's getting me.
So that new bike was there, and also a dear member, I think, had sent me on Instagram, if I remember correctly, some pictures of little Trek training on a Trek speed concept without the ISO speed, which, yeah, the ISO speed is in the Trek speed concept, and it wasn't in the one that they were riding with. So who knows if that's a new bike or if they've just taken it out because the pros don't really need it,
and because it weighs not a little.
I think that's
always been the problem with ISO speed. I always think that so part of the reason why I think it's interesting to look at these time trial bikes for folks out there who are like, I don't time trial, I don't care. Maybe I road race, or I race crits, or I race gravel, or whatever. I do think it's interesting to look at these bikes because they're at the forefront, right? Like, they are, the little tweaks that they make on these bikes are often stuff that shows up on regular road bikes in a year or two, right? So maybe from that perspective, let's start with the one that looks the funkiest, to me anyway, as a layman. The Pinarello with the groovy bits on the front. That's the technical term, I believe.
Yes.
Explain to me. So we saw this first on track bikes, right? And I think specifically with the Dan Bigham hour record.
Actually, going back further than that, one of the Australian sprinters, Glazer, had it on his track bike at the Rio Olympics, believe it or not, just on the seat post, so above the frame. But the technology or the concept originates from some study that researchers at the University of Adelaide had done way back in, I think, like 2007. And then over the number of years, they had like applied their findings to bicycle frames and came up with a patent. And then Glazer had used it at the Olympics. And then, long story short, Zip ended up with it on wheels. Princeton Carbon Works ended up with it on wheels.
The whale wheels.
Yeah,
the classic whale wheels.
And that's actually, I've just completely not mentioned the fact that this is sort of based on the tubercles of a humpback whale. And as I wrote this article, and our editor Joe Lindsay had pointed out to me, we went almost a full week without some mention of whales and cycling. But it kind of stemmed, like the research had looked at the tubercles on the flippers of whales and found that these shapes help them do these incredible turns that they can do underwater and jumping out of water despite their size. And so then they thought, well, is there, underwater aerodynamics, they're all effectively the same sort of science. And so they
hydrodynamics, aerodynamics.
Yes, exactly. So they looked at applying that to bicycles. And let's jump back into where I'd already mentioned that it found its way onto a seat post and then some wheels. Then Pinarello used it first for Dan Bigham's our record bike in 2022, so 2 years ago now. That was the first time we'd seen it like incorporated into the actual tubes of a frame, on what is technically speaking a commercially available frame.
So the leading edge of a humpback whale, is it a fin or a flipper on a
I said
mammal?
flipper. It could be a fin. I'm not really a whale expert.
If we've got any whale experts out there, let us know. I should actually. My dad is here, and he's like a scientist guy, and I could just go ask him. But we'll just continue on with. We're gonna go with fin.
Cetologists or cetiologists, the branch of zoology that deals with whales, dolphins, and porpoises.
Fin is a fish. Flipper is. We're going with flipper.
What podcast are we doing here?
Glad we solved that. I just Googled it really quickly. Anyway, okay, so the front of a humpback whale arm. And back, actually, right? I think it's the front and the back. No, it's on the front mostly. Anyway, it looks like kind of ridges or teeth, I guess, for folks that are kind of wondering what on earth we're talking about here. Kind of bulbous in places. I mean, we're talking about an organic thing, and so slightly less kind of dialed than what the front of the Pinarello looks like. But yeah, basically we're talking about sort of ridges on the front of these fins / flippers. That what exactly are they doing? Are they is this like a flow separation thing? Like what's going on?
Yeah, so they're so-called sinusoidal hydrofoils. If you're looking for the marketing speak and all this, and basically what they're doing, according to Pinarello, is reducing the flow separation and drag around the seat post. Pinarello had identified the seat tube and seat post, both actually, as significant areas of drag on the bicycle and rider system due to the rider's legs, sort of that piston motion up and down. That apparently that causes this sort of pressure zone around the seat tube, and that's what they're trying to negate with these sinusoidal hydrofoils.
No, it's great. I was just asking ChatGPT whether whales have flippers or fins. It appears they have both. Anyway, I give up.
Maybe they're alternating flippers and fins on the Pinarello. It's asymmetric.
Whales have flippers. Their front limbs, known as pectoral fins, are actually modified flippers. What? That help them steer and maneuver in the water. Anyway, okay, sorry. This is what happens when I join a podcast. God, weird. It told me to add glue to my pizza and eat rocks once a day. I don't really understand what it's doing. All right, so next on the list, Pinarello's, I think, quite interesting. Actually, before we move on, do you think we're going to see these things on road bikes? Are they coming to aero road bikes in particular?
It's interesting because when Pinarello unveiled Big and Mangana's our record bike a couple of years ago, they had mentioned how difficult it would be to recreate this with carbon, and that's why that bike was 3D printed. That, and also the fact that they needed that bike much quicker, and 3D printing meant that they could deliver it in a shorter timeline. But they've already transferred it across to the carbon version of their Bolide HR track bike for the upcoming Olympics. The Italian women's team pursuit squad will use that frame. It seems now like this is a carbon time trial bike. I'm presuming it's not 3D printed, and so yeah, it seems like they've found a way to do what they thought they couldn't in building it with carbon. And I guess that means that at that point, why wouldn't it make its way into road racing and road
because weight
frames?
wouldn't increase materially, right? I mean, like a little bit, but
It depends. I guess it depends if your shapes are adding height or subtracting height. If you've got your standard size seat tube, are you adding tubercles to it, or are you cutting shapes out of it?
right.
If that makes
I mean,
sense.
there's more material either way, right? Like if you've got it up, down, it's going to be longer than a straight line. So it's still going to be slightly more material, but I think, you're right. If it's carbon, it probably is a relatively marginal increase in weight.
I jest mostly, but I seem to recall also that it was sort of, although the flow through that area is highly turbulent because of the rider's rotating legs, I seem to remember something about it, being more effective in the sort of the more controlled environment of an indoor velodrome. But again, we've seen it now on a road time trial bike, and so whether I guess it's one of those, it probably makes some marginal gain, but it's also a maximal differentiator between Pinarello and other time trial bikes, and so for that reason alone, we may well see it make its way across to road bikes.
Yeah, hard to tell at the moment whether it's like various companies over the years have like split the forks, for example. Like I think didn't Villiers do this at one point,
Yep.
and like they say that it tests better in the tunnel, but nobody else decides to do the same, and so then you have to kind of question, okay, well, lots of folks are running CFD analysis and putting stuff in a wind tunnel and putting stuff in a velodrome, and no one else is doing this. So is it actually as big of a, or is it just essentially like a marketing thing?
The podcast we recorded with the Geek Warning special episode that we released earlier this week with Marco Genovese, who's head of design at Willier, he didn't want to get into names, but he seemed to be hinting at, and this was before we had seen this Bully Day, and nobody knew there was an outdoor version of this bike coming. And he had hinted at some of the effects that Pinarello were trying to achieve with that. He hadn't mentioned Pinarello, but I had asked him, did the brand name begin with a P? And he had sort of said yes, it might. And he didn't want to be drawn any further. But it's something that other brands are seemingly aware of. I know, obviously you had the whole Zip and Princeton Carbon Works lawsuit, and Zip were using that sinusoidal design effect on license from Dimitri Katsanis, and I don't know if the end result of all that lawsuit shenanigans is that anybody can now use that design, and does that mean that Pinarello have exclusivity on this, or does it mean that any brand could come along now and use the same design? Does that exclusivity mean that's why we haven't seen it on other frames, or have we not seen it on other frames because it does or does not work? There's a lot of unknowns there, but I think that the fact that Pinarello are now applying it to a road bike is definitely interesting.
So speaking of Willier, what do they got coming? Or what is here, I should say?
They have a €27,400 time trial bike they released earlier this week that I've had the pleasure of having an up close, a few encounters with it at this point. I was in Italy to see some of the design work. I was in Belgium to see Stefan Küng testing it. I was in Switzerland to see him getting his aero position dialed in. And it's €27,400 because you actually get a set of custom time trial extensions along with that 3D printed in carbon. And the frame itself, I think, is €9,000 off the top of my head. And what's more interesting about it, besides the price, we have to mention the price because it is so high. But it's high, but they definitely want to sell these things. This isn't one of those UCI loopholes where they're like trying to make sure that nobody orders it. They're
they're
happy, and they're hoping to sell some of these, because I specifically had asked that. And also, if it was one of those, typically it's not €9,000 for a frame, then it's €90,000 if you actually don't want somebody to buy it. Anyway, what I was going to say was, what's interesting about this frame is just that Willier have sort of returned to the traditional NACA profiles, the sort of teardropped profile that we originally seen in cycling aerodynamics, and then it disappeared as Trek at first, and then pretty much every other brand jumped on the camtail or truncated profile tubing, because it offers both. It offers, from what I understand, it offers most of the aero gains, but it comes in a lighter and stiffer package. One of the problems with using a traditional NACA teardrop profile is that it's both flexible and then heavy, because you have to bulk it up to gain back some of the stiffness. And Willier said, well, that just doesn't really matter on a time trial bike, because weight is less important and aero is king. And so they've returned to NACA, and they've gone full classic looking aero shapes with the new Supersonica, as they're calling it.
What's old is new again.
Very much so, apparently.
And it probably doesn't really matter how it rides. I mean, I remember riding like some original NACA profile aero road bikes when aero road bike kind of first took off. I'm talking like 2012, 13, 14, right? And some of them rode like absolute garbage. Like, you just ride a 2x4, because the only way to make them stiff enough was to make the tube walls massively thick, and carbon fiber it was just sort of like completely dead underneath you. Just a miserable riding experience. Quite quick, particularly back in the day compared to sort of everything else that was out there. But miserable to ride. Doesn't really matter on a time trial bike.
Doesn't matter. Two things about that. Küng had, at that test I was at in Belgium, he had reported back to Willier, here, look, this thing it's flexing the seat tube and it's flexing the head tube, and we need to fix those. And Willier apparently were able to fix those with basically using a new carbon, if I remember correctly, and a new type of layup. So that brought some stiffness back. And then the other issue with using NACA profiles is just that your bottle tends to be much wider than the down tube profile. And so Willier wanted to integrate the bottle, kind of like we see a lot of time trial frame manufacturers doing these days. But for whatever reason, they ran into UCI problems when others have not, with very, very similar designs. And as I dig into in the article, the development of the bottle for this bike cost €22,000, which is just, yeah. But yeah, the UCI are now happy with it, because I still can't see what the difference is, but they're happy now anyway. So
that's all we care about. We really just want the UCI to be happy in all of this. So, what about Cervelo? Anything new to the table? I mean, Cervelo is sort of notorious for always having a very, very fast time trial bike that doesn't really do anything insane, right? So is that kind of still the same as it's always been?
We've seen their new P5 back in February at Volta Algarve, and it looks like it's taking a similar direction to what they did with the S5 2 years ago, in that it's very hard to spot the differences between the new P5 and the old one. There are differences. It is new, but it seems like they've just made the bike easier to work with and live with, and a couple of minor tweaks here and there to make it a little bit faster also, presumably. They haven't actually commented anything on the new bike yet, but looking at it, it looks like they've simplified the sort of BNA external steerer setup that frame has, much like they did with the S5. They made that easier to live with, and presumably a few other things. Not much to really say about that bike, other than it is a new P5, and we're sort of waiting to hear more.
And they're always good, so it'll probably be good.
Yeah,
in general.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that Trek. We spotted this Trek without an ISO speed. Is that just a weight question?
I think it pretty much is, yes. Like, a lot of the manufacturers I'm speaking to about time trial bikes are telling me that the pro teams are now pushing them very, very hard for lighter time trial bikes. And that's
because the time trials they have to do keep putting giant hills in the in the middle of the course.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, you'd still have to question, like, what difference does saving 200, 300, 400 grams really make? But yeah, that's what the teams want now, and that's what the manufacturers have to do. And I would imagine that's why Trek have taken the ISO speed out. I can't think of any reason why it would have been slower. Like, it didn't really the frame doesn't appear any different. There weren't really any reasons why it would have any extra drag to it. It just would have been a bit extra weight. One other new bike in the Giant Trinity, but yeah, we've seen that a couple months ago at this point. And I think it is interesting that we're seeing all these new bikes in the Olympic year. Obviously, you got the Tour de France first, and that kind of falls in nicely. But I think the Trinity hasn't been updated in a long time. The P5 hasn't been updated in a long time. The ISOSpeed is about 3 years old. The fact that these, on the one hand, you've got really old frames being updated, and that's an Olympic year. And then you've got the Pinarello and Willier who are making a new frame. And it's not that long since they brought out new time trial frames, like literally 2 years. Right. And I think it's, very different reasons, the same Olympic reason, but very different timelines. And I think it is just down to the fact that there is an Olympics this year.
And the Olympic time trial is kind of the biggest time trial going at this point, right? I mean, so it used to be, if you won, there was always like some big classic 55K flat TT at the Tour de France, right? And if you won that, it was like the time trial is Champs-Élysées, right? It was like you were the king of time trial and queen of time trialing. Now that we have a women's Tour de France, it doesn't exist anymore, right? Like they very rarely run TTs like that at the Tour. They very rarely run TTs, period, across most of the sort of professional racing calendar. And so this Olympic time trial, if you make time trial bikes, is it's the highest profile event, which is an interesting thing because historically the Olympics have not been that important to.
They're always very important to the person who wins.
Yes.
To the people who are second, third, and not winning, the World Championships are more important.
Well, speaking of the Olympics, I think none other than Mr. Stefan Küng, who is the latter half of this episode, would probably like to take home that gold medal. I think he would tell you that the Olympic time trial is pretty important, and the Tour de France time trials that he will be partaking in the next couple of weeks. So let's jump over to your chat with Stefan.
Let's go. Stefan Küng, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to discuss the future of time trialing and a special new bike that you've just had for the opening stage of Tour de Suisse. Before we get to that, though, I want to ask you a question we had been sent by a listener, and that was asking if time trial specialists are endangered species. And the listener had they had mentioned yourself and Philippe Ogana and asked if the Watt monsters, as they called them, are now being replaced by aero weenies. And I thought it was a good question given the varied types of riders who win time trials these days. What do you think? Are time trial specialists endangered? And who is it that actually wins time trials these days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for sure is that when you look at the Grand Tours in the last years, there is not so many like time trial specialist specific time trials that there used to be. It's always been a major piece of the GC battle, but now also like how they make the routes, you have pretty very, very demanding time trials. When you look, for example, at the Tour de Suisse, the last time trial is an uphill time trial. Or when you look at the Tour de France, the last time trial has like more than 600 meters of elevation. And yeah, that's the trend, kind of, because they want to have the best GC riders also battling it out. And so that makes it for the Watt monsters a little bit more difficult to compete. Mm-hmm. We saw in the Giro, in the first time trial, Ghana got beaten by Tadej Pogačar. There has been maybe better time as a pure time trial specialist, but nevertheless, in the end, you always got to work on your strengths without forgetting your weaknesses. So there's still a few time trials to win, and for sure it doesn't make it easier because you have like pure specialists like Ghana, or I would also like consider Joshua Tarling, myself, and then you have very versatile riders like Pogačar or Wout van Aert or Vingegaard who can, or Primož Roglič who can win time trials. So yeah, this always makes for a fierce competition, that's for sure. then at least you have the championships, like World Championships, European Championships, and this year also the Olympic Games. And you often see that even though in Grand Tours, like Pogacar's, Vingegaard's, they win kind of most of the time trials, that in like pure one-day TTs, it's more often that the specialists come out on top. I mean, where do you consider Remco Evenepoel? But
Yes, I hadn't even thought of Remco. That's an entirely different question almost. Do you think is that because the GC riders have such powers of recovery, or do you think it's because the courses and Grand Tours are trending towards more difficult parkour?
I think it's a bit of both. For sure, for Tadej Pogacar, Giro d'Italia is easier, I mean, in parentheses, than for a big guy like Filippo. So for sure, like Tadej, like his general level is so much higher, even though if it's just a fierce tempo in the peloton, Tadej has still maybe, I don't know, 5% room to his red zone, whereas Filippo might be already in his red zone or close by.
Yeah.
And so I think the general fatigue is higher with a big guy than it is for a GC rider. And this, for example, will play a role absolutely in the last TT of the Tour de France, for example, that these guys, they just get through the whole race in overall better condition, or they suffer less, like muscularly, if you have to get 80 plus kilos over the mountains, it's doable. Like, it's not a big problem, but I think it takes more out of your body than it does when you're a GC contender and like naturally made for this.
You've had such strong results in the classics, even as recently as this spring. Are you a time trial specialist, or are you a spring classic specialist?
I wouldn't consider myself a time trial specialist. I mean, to me, a time trial specialist is like a guy who only gets result in a time trial. So Victor Kampenart used to be a time trial specialist, and then he converted himself to a different kind of rider. I would say like time trial is my strong suit, that's for sure. Like that's my strength. That's where I'm pretty sure to score results. And so I always will keep working on that. But for me, I don't look at the calendar and say, okay, there's these 8-9 time trials throughout the years. That's the days where I want to perform, and the rest of it are just leading up to these 8-9 days. For me, I have a lot, like, for example, the spring campaign is really important for myself. So like the first part of the year is more focused on the spring classics. For sure, we do like the base work on the time trialing as well. But now in this part of the preparation, it's more focused on time trialing, that's for sure.
Can you balance both, or does focusing too much on one compromise the other?
I think it's good to have something else as well, because let's say if you're like just focusing on the time trialing and it's not going well, then myself, I've always like different goals, and I kind of like that. And for example, in the big championships, let's say last year in Glasgow, the time trial didn't go as I had imagined, and then the road race was way better than what I first thought I could do on this course. So, even though I kind of missed out on the time trial, I was up there in the road race. So it's always, and in the end, like my general world campaign last year was still a success. Or 2019, like I had really high expectations in the time trial. I think I got 11 or something like that. And then in the road race, I got the bronze medal. So, it's always good to be able to score in both races.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sure the best would be to win in the time trial and take the pressure off, and then go to the road race. That would be the ideal. Are you the kind of time trialist that is like just fascinated on every little tech detail and always thinking about what you can change and what you can upgrade?
Kind of a little bit of love-hate relationship, with these optimizations, because for sure it's fascinating what you can do and where you can this little extra percentage out of it. But nowadays it has become so intense, so demanding, like you have to turn every little piece upside down because, the concurrence is doing it. And so it's always like you can never rest, like even each winter you have to do wind tunnel sessions, you have to do track sessions. On one hand, it's nice, it's cool to be able to do that because you're at the top of the sport. On the other hand, it's like a really big investment, because if you're not a time trial specialist, like some of my teammates, all these extra time that I spend on these tests and this researchers and position optimization, I think if you count it over a whole year, it adds up to several days, if not weeks, you know.
And that's for those guys. That's just to stay still where they are. That's not to move up the results.
Yeah, because you always have to keep evolving. Otherwise, you're gonna lose your position pretty quickly. But then on the other hand, it's nice to be able to compete with the world's best in this discipline. So I wouldn't want to miss it. But sometimes I'm at this point like, oh, again, you know, like let's say you're dialed into your position. You think, okay, we've got everything done, and then you come towards off season, and then you already, because the work starts at the end of the season before having the break. Like that's normally when you do a lot of tests because you're physically still in shape. So you're able to do a lot of runs because, for example, on the track, you have to do pretty high intensities to be able to reproduce the speeds that you need to test. And then it's often like, one year I did Chrono de Nation, and the day after or 2 days later I was in the velodrome from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening, riding around in circles, testing, you know, like it never stops. And I mean, it's probably also after I'm in my 10th season as a professional. Before I was doing a lot of track, so, you know, I've always done this. And after all those years, you think at one point you will just be there, and that's like your ideal position, and everything is perfect, and you can keep and just stay with it. But this is never gonna happen.
Yeah, I can imagine a full day on the velodrome after a long season when all you want to do is put your feet up. That's not ideal. But I'm interested though, like those changes at the end of the season. I seen you testing just 1 month ago, and you know you had everything dialed. When you get to the end of this season, is that you looking to improve your position based on feelings you had in the race, or is that because new equipment has come and you need to test how that equipment fits in?
Honestly, like right now, I'm really, really happy with like the position. Like I know it's fast. I feel quite comfortable. In the process, you always see things. Oh, maybe we could test this. Maybe we could test this. And it always, you kind of put it in the corner in the back of your mind. And when the season comes to an end, you start discussing with the performance team. Yeah, what do you think? Maybe it's worth testing this. Maybe it's worth testing that. So it's always also this intrinsic motivation that you have to constantly keep improving. Even though if you feel comfortable, you know that when you're standing still, you're kind of going backwards.
Would you ever consider like an aero meter to test at home, or have you ever done that?
Yeah, like that's one of the things that we are going to do probably the coming off season or like over the winter, because we have these kind of systems. Like we have different systems that we work with, like the aerometer on the bike, but also a different system. I'm not giving away all the secrets. That's another weird part about it, you know, like you always try to keep something from the concurrent, so you're not too open about talking about everything that you're doing, obviously. But yeah, these are other things that we're going to look into, because nowadays testing, it's not only in the wind tunnel or in the velodrome, like it's also field tests are quite important, because in the end, where you're racing is on the open streets, is on the open roads, and you're not racing in a wind tunnel, you're not racing on a track in my case. So it's also important nowadays, these devices are pretty reliable. But first, like the performance team, like they have to do the evaluation if this data is like really good enough. So the team was already testing some devices with other riders, like they're like this, you're not losing another day.
Yes.
Like first we're doing the tests with other riders to see if the data like adds up, if it's really reliable, and if that's the case, then we're going to conduct some tests with yourself.
You had a nasty crash in the European Championships last year. Have you fully recovered from that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a scar on my forehead, but other than that, it's behind me.
You were still wearing a small plaster when I seen you in March, I think. Is that
that's
something?
also to protect another scar. I mean, like the doctors told me, scar tissue can take up to 12 months to like fully recover. So especially in the face, like it's just of a cosmetic issue that I was wearing the little plaster.
Does that, you've done a few time trials since, does that crash play on your mind in the time trial position, or how is that?
Honestly, it was more like the first time I remounted on my time trial bike. Like this was in training that the memories come up. I mean, the body, I think it's automatic that when you're again in this setting, that like your brain connects it to when you were on it the last time and with this crash. But nowadays, I don't even think about it. Or even in the first race, like this was Algarve, I never thought about it, not even like days before. It was more when I restarted training, maybe in November, when I rewrote the time trial bike. Then yeah, it sure came up. But we had a lot of talks. Like, you know, it's not that you crash, you end your season, and you just forget about it. No, it's process of digestion, and this I took this pretty serious, and so nowadays it doesn't affect me anymore.
Do you think anything needs to change to make time trialing safer, or do you think there is a safety problem in time trialing?
I mean, in the end, when you look at Formula One, they're not telling the drivers to slow down. Like they make them slow down either, or they give them more safety room. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. I mean, when I crashed, people were like, yeah, but why doesn't he just look up? Why doesn't, like, he was riding into the barrier straight away? Okay, I see the point, absolutely. But on the other hand, you can never ask a racer to not do everything to go as fast as possible, especially like, yeah, nowadays, aerodynamics, everybody knows an awful lot about it, especially as a time trial specialist. So you're always going to take the most aero position, especially like it was a straight road for 10Ks and no obstacle. So that was almost the danger, that it was not dangerous at all, you know?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, maybe you have to consider the direction we are going. And maybe we can also mark, because on the road races, you also have a lot more signs nowadays than it used to be 10 years ago. Maybe you can have this as well in time trialing, you know, and instead of being on the side of the road, you can put some of them on the road, like with paint or whatever, because, you know, in time trialing, you're more likely to look at the road than actually what's coming up. And when I say at the road, you're still looking ahead, but you see more the tarmac than you see the sky. And so we should maybe consider, the right road indications to make something visible on the ground as well. I mean, for sure you have a look at the parkour, but like in a Grand Tour, when it's a twisty time trial, I remember the time trial that the finish was in Rocamadour in the Tour a few years back. It was so twisty, like it was 40 some kilometers, and it had so many like just twists and turns. There is almost no way of memorizing each one of them.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about, you know, what can be done for time trialing also. It's very difficult to come up with a solution that doesn't, you know, overly hinder one type of rider versus another, like taller riders or smaller riders, and it's very difficult to come up with solutions that don't just create new problems. So I think we'll all just hope that nothing like that is seen again. But we're here today also just to talk about, it's a big year for you. You've got the Olympics, the Tour de France time trial, Tour de Suisse time trial, and a home World Championships. And Willier have made you a new time trial bike for those events. Yeah, how is the bike? You've had a few rides on it now. All set for, you're going to, by the time the listeners will have heard this, you'll have actually have raced on it.
So yeah, the bike's great. I mean, at least as we're talking right now, I haven't raced on it yet, but in training it handles great. It feels great, that's for sure. And I'm pretty excited to test it. For sure, it's my kind of secret or not so secret weapon anymore towards the big goals this summer, and with Olympic Games, World Championships, and so on.
It's I think it has kind of remained a secret. Normally I start hearing rumors and stuff, but I haven't heard anything about this bike, which is interesting. What are you looking for in a new time trial bike? Obviously you want aerodynamics, but when you're talking to Willier and the first time you get on it, what are those characteristics and the sensations you're looking for?
So in the first place, I for sure, like, we talk about the bike, but then I have full confidence in the engineering stuff, because I mean, nowadays a modern frame, it's one algorithm, it's a calculation. it's not like a drawing that you say, oh, I like these looks of the bike. So they take into consideration like the new rule book. And then they go with that, they push it to the limit, and they make it as much error as possible. And then my job comes more into play when I get the first rideable prototype, where I ride on it and they need my feedback. And then we were still able to adjust like the layup of the carbon fibers, that we saw like there was 2 different spots on the bike where I wanted like more rigidity or something like that. And then I got the second version of the bike, and then I give again feedback, and if all this works well, then we go with that.
Have you been involved in frame development previously, or is this the first time?
No, it was the case. I mean, with PNC it was a bit particular, because they say, yeah, we're going to give you a prototype. And then when I wrote the prototype and they asked me for my feedback, they were like, oh no, that's the final version. So that was not really what I was imagining it. But with Lapierre, it was really the case. Like with the TT bike, I had different frames, like they were all the same frame visually, but the layup was different, and they didn't tell me which had which layup. And first of all, I thought I can never sense the difference. But then I had a lap, it was in Spain, and I rode like with each bike, and then I gave my feedback. I said, yeah, I think this one bottom bracket more stiff, this has this and that, and it was actually accurate. And this was pretty surprising for me, like that you were able to feel that. And it was the same case here with the Willier. Like feedback I gave, and then I got the new bike. Like for example, on the head tube, we did some modifications, and this I felt straight away. And so it's pretty nice to be able to do that. Also, like to be able to feel the difference and then talk to the engineer. But I always have to filter like my feedback, because in the end, it's always like I come up with a feeling, and I talk to the engineer, and then I say, yeah, like confirm it with your data. Maybe look at it once again. It's more like, and then he looks again at the data and says, yeah, there is something. And so, for example, the head tube part, like I was feeling it, and he actually told me that's a piece where I wanted to rework or redo some work on this part. And if this overlays the feedback and like he's, what he sees, then we do some modifications, because sometimes it's hard to say, I want a stiffer bottom bracket, I want that, and then you overshoot it, because you need to have certain dynamic in the bike, you need to have certain flexibility and so on. Like it's a fine line. And
we also have a podcast with Marco coming, so the listeners can look forward to that and digging into the entire design process of the bike. I was going to ask you how important like a new bike is and how much difference can it actually make, but I think maybe the better way to ask that question is if you think it's possible to compete. If you had a 5-year-old frame now, could you compete in these events this year, or do you need the latest stuff?
Yeah, you could, or you can.
Could you compete for the win?
But for sure, it's the ideal case when you have the best bike out there. On one hand, it's an advantage that you have on the material side, but on the other hand, it also plays a factor mentally. When you know, okay, my material is on fleek, it's like really perfect and as fast as it can get, it gives you an extra boost, like motivation, but also self-confidence and so on, and just pure joy in the end. Like I'm really looking forward to ride this bike as fast as possible, because it's already fast in training, so it's going to be even faster in the racing. Once we're racing.
You speak of it being fast, like, and so much of modern time trialing is coming down to science and numbers and the testing that we talked about. Can you be confident in that speed sensation that actually it translates into aerodynamic speed and that it's actually fast on race day?
Yeah, you have different kind of characters. I know some guys, they're like, I got my pacing from my coach and I just follow the pacing and then I know I'm gonna win. Like I had guys telling me this. Or after the race when they didn't win, they said, I couldn't hold the pacing, otherwise I would have won. I was like, well, it doesn't matter, does it? Like, and I'm more, maybe you can call it old school, I don't know what you want to call it, but I'm more like, a time trial is always like, you have to be able to feel what you're capable of doing on the day. Because for sure, I always get a pacing plan, or we always like work out a pacing. But then in the end, you still have to be able to adapt to it. Like, especially in the Grand Tour, for example, like you can have a pacing plan and think, wow, like I'm not able to keep this, and then you're still racing for the win. Or sometimes you have a pacing plan and you like overshoot it and you're just about there in contention. So you always, so many factors that actually play a part in a time trial that you have to consider. And in the end, what matters, it's not the watts, it's just the pure speed. It's the time. It's a time trial. Like in the end, nobody cares, or at least I don't, how low your CDA was on the day, how big your wattage number was on the day. In the end, it counts if you were the fastest or not. Always have to keep this in mind. Like I don't go out there and say I want to break my power record. No, I want to win. And if I can sit up before a corner and breathe, yeah, okay, it's going to have a negative effect on my average power. But I don't mind if then I get faster around the corner and carry more speed, and it's better, you know. And in my opinion, you always have to keep this in mind.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say that. I feel like a lot of riders have slipped into power tests and power numbers, and a time trial is targeting the highest power. I'll wrap it up just with two final questions for you. Would you ever consider going back to Willier and asking them to make a track frame version of this bike? Where I seen you testing was in Grenchen, and the last time I was there before that was for Ghana's hour record. And I'm wondering, could you be tempted to make an attempt?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I always said no, because from the whole preparation that leads up to it, pretty demanding. Like, you know, it adds another thing, like, okay, it's track, but then it's so specific. Like there is much more, like there's way more factors than on the open roads. Like, you know, the setting, you know exactly like at which speed you're going. So then you only work the aerodynamics for this speed range. So, you know, in that hour record, okay, you have the first few laps where you accelerate, but then, you know, okay, I want to go, I don't know, between 15.3 per lap or whatever. And then, you know, okay, you're always riding at 56, 57k per hour. So we need to optimize the aerodynamics in a range from, I don't know, 55 to 59 or 58. Whereas if you test for road time trialing, you have stretches at 50k, maybe 48, but you also have stretches that's like falls flat downhill at 65k per hour. So you have a much wider range, and then you filter the results and then take the fastest setup. So you cannot say, okay, I have a good setup now on the road, I transfer it to the track. I ask Villiers to rework the frame a little bit to make it suitable for the track, and that's it. I think you restart in a way, and honestly, yeah, as I have also a lot of ambitions in other areas like classics and so on, I think I just don't see where I could fit it into my calendar at the moment. And unless I ask me again if I've won the Olympics and the Worlds, then maybe I say, okay, that's the next big project. I don't know, but before I haven't ticked off at least the rainbow stripes from my palmares, I will first focus on that.
Well, that's a good goal, but I will say you made it sound like the track was easier. There's just one speed. The road has all these different speeds, so yeah.
Holding your position for 1 hour, I cannot imagine how hard this must be. To be able to do that, I would have to ride a lot on the track again, just to be able to get your body used to it again. And as Filippo, he was constantly doing track with the Italian team, so he's always maintaining this. And since 2016, I never raced on a track bike again. So even though I have my roots on the track, I would still have to, rework, because since then my position completely changed and so on. So yeah, it would be a big effort.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge, I think, for anybody to compete with Ghana's time, given his track pedigree at the moment.
That's the other part of it, because he put the bar so high that even though if you make an attempt, you're nowhere sure to beat him, you know? And like back in the days when the record was at, I don't know, 52 kilometers or something like that, then you say, okay, I'll have a go, I can better this. I'm pretty confident. But nowadays I'm I think nobody's confident and he can better him, you know? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, honestly, I don't think I will ever try it. It was more the people around me that were more motivated to see me do it than myself, because I think you really need to want it. You really have to have joy in doing it. And I don't see myself riding around in circles again on the velodrome. It was never a part of cycling that I loved. I was good at it, but I started cycling because it's out in the nature, because it's an outside sport, and trek is an indoor sport. So yeah, as I said, I prefer being outside and racing my bike outside and having big goals to chase.
Okay, one final quick question, Stefan. Did you ever find the wedding ring?
No, I didn't, and no one did,
Oh, wow.
unfortunately. Like, I had several people contacting me that they were searching for it. I called the hospital and so on, and we tried to find it again, but no, I haven't. So I'm still ringless, because I said to my wife, look, I'm not gonna buy a wedding ring, because actually it was the former wedding ring of my grandmother that we modified. Goldsmith, he modified it, and it was engraved with the name of my wife and the date that we actually met. And I said, if you want that I have a wedding ring again, you have to gift me one. You know, like, I asked you if you wanted to become my wife, and so now it's your job to get me a ring.
All right. Well, if you're listening to this and you don't know what we're talking about, our own Ian Traylor wrote an article on how Stefan lost his wedding ring at some point following that crash in the European Championships. And if you happen to live near that course and you're listening to this, maybe just go out and have another look this weekend and see if it has to be somewhere. It definitely has to be somewhere. So. All right, Stefan, thank you for your time today. That was fascinating, and good luck with the new bike, and good luck with the time trials coming up over the summer.
Thank you very much.